Out of the Blue, How Animals Evolved from Prehistoric Seas. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Shreeve, author of Out of the Blue. This is where I write and make videos, and of course this is where Hector hangs out with his friends, Octopus and Sloth, working hard today. If you're watching this video, you've probably read the book or watched the first video, Take the Plunge. Now it's time to meet with three experts who helped me by sharing their knowledge of fossils, the remains of ancient life, and also live animals. And they've kindly provided interviews to tell us more about their research and how they go out into the field to explore and discover. We'll start with Dr. Rich Moy, a biologist at the California Academy of Sciences who knows a lot about life in the oceans. As a boy, Rich dreamed of sailing on a research vessel or diving deep under the waves. His dreams came true. Let's hear what he has to say. Hi, Rich. Thanks for joining us. Tell us about the California Academy of Sciences. We'd love to visit the exhibits, but what happens behind the scenes and in the collections?
The answer to that question is basically all kinds of research. So we have both fossil and animals and plants that live today, and that makes a really powerful way to explore not only what's going on today, but looking back in the past. My laboratory is much more than just a little room where I have a microscope and specimens to look at. The whole world is our laboratory. For a museum scientist, that's really true because we do a lot of field work. And of course, when we come back with our fossils and when we come back with our specimens, we build a kind of library of life.
So all these terrific specimens, live specimens and fossil specimens, how are they used to better understand the history of animals?
Fossils are really the most important way that scientists can study earliest life. By studying samples of rock and how the rocks are arranged in layers, scientists can figure out how old the rocks are. So we know that the Earth started to form about 4.5 billion years ago. We know that there are fossils of the very first tiny microbes a little over 3.5 billion years ago. There's also evidence that there were lots and lots of these microbes because they lived in continuous layers on the sea bottom, and these were kind of like a rug on your floor covering the rocks. Scientists call these strange fossils stromatolites.
And then much later, those little microbes developed into some of the strange, squishy animals that show up in the book. That was the Cambrian period. Why was that such an important time?
Water levels were higher, and there were large areas where the ocean could cover the land in shallow seas that were actually relatively warm, were the perfect place for life to start the process of becoming more complex.
Predators started to emerge around this time too, kind of jetting around the seas. That initiated developments in animals where they got prickles and spines and armored shells at that time.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
It's an arms race where everybody's looking to hunt and then also defending themselves so that they don't get eaten. And all this is happening in the oceans. But what was the land like back then, 500 million years ago?
Well, the land itself was not yet colonized by life, but there's some suggestion that fairly early on in the Cambrian, there were layers of microbes a little bit similar to the ones that made the stromatolite that had already invaded the land, close to the water's edge. But further inland, things were a little bit on the dry side, and there was a lot of bare rock out there.
So, Rich, when I came over to the Academy, you told me about your specialty, a group of animals that never moved onto land.
Well, echinoderms are spiny animals like starfish and sea urchins. They have hard parts, internal skeletons that make them fantastically detailed fossils that go all the way back to the Cambrian. But they're different from other animals. Echinoderms are kind of leaky. They leak their body fluids easily because they don't have a hard outer covering like in a crab-like animal.
Oh, well, that would definitely keep them from coming onto land. It'd be like a bag with lots of holes in it.
And the holes are places like if you turn over a starfish, you look on the underside, you see all these tube feet waving around. That's the way that these animals move. The tube feet themselves rely on having water inside them. And of course, that's really hard to maintain on land. They dry out pretty quickly.
I see. So they stuck to the oceans and they let the other types of animals explore onto land and just hung out in the water where they were happy.
They seem to have a pretty good time in the ocean.
Right. Just like you do, right? Yeah. Are you happiest when you're doing your work in the ocean?
You know, I'm really, really happy when I'm out there doing field works in places like the Philippines. There's nothing like the thrill of seeing these animals come up on deck. The most exciting thing in my life, to pick up a rock that's 20 million, 400 million years old, crack it open, and be the first living thing to see a fossil of another living thing in all that time.
Wow, I bet that's really exciting. You're not only a biologist, you're also an artist. How does artwork help you?
It really forces me to look carefully at all the details. So it also means I often see things that I might not see if I wasn't also trying to make a really good, accurate drawing. Most people like to look at things that other people have made with their own hand, and a drawing can encourage people to look at things for that reason alone. The longer you look, the more you learn.
Dr. Rich Moy at the California Academy of Sciences, thank you so much for spending time with us and for helping on Out of the Blue. And please keep up the good work and go out there in the field and get wet.
My pleasure, Elizabeth.
After talking to Rich, I began to understand how life evolved slowly in the water, while the land lay rocky and bare for millions and billions of years. And I wondered, which animal first ventured onto shore? To answer this, I reached out to Dr. Petra Sierwald at the Field Museum in Chicago, Illinois. When Petra was a girl, her grandmother put a spider on her hand and said, "Look, isn't it beautiful?" Since then, Dr. Sierwald has become an expert in spiders and also in another little creature that turns out to be surprisingly adventurous. Let's learn more. Hello, Petra. Tell us about your work at the Field Museum in Chicago.
So my job is to work in the insect collections. We also work on arachnids and myriapods. We have 4.3 million pinned insect specimens alone, and then we have millions of specimens in alcohol that can be used for any study.
So tell me, what is a myriapod?
Many leggers, millipedes and centipedes.
Of all these amazing little creatures that had skeletons on the outsides, why do we think that it was some kind of millipede or myriapod that may have been the first animals to venture onto land so long ago?
So we know from the fossil record, from actually deposits in Scotland that are about 420, 430 million years old. There are many-legged arthropod specimens, and we know that they were land-living because they have openings just above their leg that are openings to their respiratory or air-breathing organs.
I see. So they came from the ocean, and they came onto land and they started to breathe air through these little openings.
Right.
One of the things that we can find from these early land pioneers is something called a trackway. Tell us what that is.
Those are footprints that they left. And it kind of makes sense because what do millipedes eat? Rotting salad, basically, rotting vegetation. And the first food that was available on land was some kind of algae that was a nutrient to be harvested.
And they said, oh, this is pretty good, and nobody's trying to eat me right here. Maybe I'll hang out here on the land.
Because there was no predator. And if you have a hard outer exoskeleton, you also can lift your body up, because in water you float, but on air it's very different. Also, it protects you from desiccation.
Right, because all of a sudden you're out there in the air and you could just dry out.
Exactly. So millipedes maintained this kind of lifestyle, munching down on leaf litter for the last 450 million years. By that, millipedes do a great service to the ecosystem.
They probably started out small, but then I've read that they got very big 325 million years ago. They got huge, right?
Yes. A lot of arthropods got very big at that time. The dragonflies were quite frightening.
Yeah, they were enormous dragonflies.
They were kind of like drones. Yeah. I mean, like big drones.
Yeah. Oh, you can imagine giant millipedes and huge dragonflies. Pretty crazy time. Right. Millipedes are around today, and I've read that some of them can glow.
Yes. Oh, the beautiful specimens in species in the United States have beautiful coloration. pink and orange and yellow and contrasted with black. I don't know yet why they glow.
You could call them the mystery of the glowing millipedes. But did some of the millipedes stay in the ocean?
No, that's a good question.
What about centipedes? Are there any centipedes in the ocean?
No. So centipedes are predators, and they can be distinguished from millipedes by millipedes have 2 pairs of legs per body ring that you see. Centipedes have only 1 pair of legs per body ring, and they have poison claws in the front. The big ones can bite. Frankly, I've never been bitten by a centipede, so.
I'm very glad. Dr. Petra Sierwald, thank you so much for telling us about the amazing world of millipedes, those first tough little critters that came onto land.
Thank you. It was lovely talking to you.
Petra taught me a lot about an animal I'd never thought much about, millipedes. Imagine them on those early empty shorelines digging into a lunch of algae by the waves. But what about animals with backbones, like us, the chordates? It's time for the invasion of the fish. Around 400 million years ago, animals with backbones crawled onto dry land for the first time. To learn more, I studied the work of Dr. Neil Shuben at the University of Chicago, who's been interested in how fish came ashore ever since he was a boy. That curiosity has taken him to some amazing places where he's made some incredible discoveries. Let's learn more. Hi, Neil. It's great to talk with you. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about your job.
Yeah, my job, I'm a paleontologist, which means I study fossils. I go out in the field, lead expeditions to discover fossils in places around the world. And then we bring the fossils back into the laboratory to study them, to look at their anatomy, to try to figure out what the creatures looked like that lived so long ago.
One of the fossils that you've found is quite famous for being transition between different animal groups. Sometimes it's called a fishapod. Tell us what is a fishapod?
Yeah, fishapod. Well, let me describe the fossil to you and then you'll understand the name. Basically, it means it's a fish with legs. Okay, so fishapod. The fossil, if I was to hold it in front of you, about 4 feet long, and you'd look at it and you'd say, oh, yeah, it looks like a fish. You'd see it has scales on its back and fins with fin webbing. But then there'd be other features that you'd say, wait a minute, that's not like a fish. It has a flat head with eyes on top, much like a crocodile. And when we looked inside the fin, when we took out those fin rays and look under the scales, what we see, it has arm bones. It has an upper arm bone, just like ours. It even has a wrist, so here's a fish with parts of our own body inside, but it's still a fish.
Wow, that's crazy. It sounds like some kind of science fiction animal put together, doesn't it? When did it live?
It's from rocks that are about 375 million years old. 375 million. That's a very, very long time. This is before dinosaurs even, existed. It was really ancient. After this, there was a lot of life on land. And so we're catching, the change right when it happened.
What does its size and its shape tell us about how the animal lived?
Yeah, when we look at this animal, the first thing you'll see when you look at the skull of this animal, it had big, sharp teeth. So what does that tell you? Tell you it ate fish. It ate insects. It ate meat. The biggest one of these is about 10 feet long. Most of them are around 4 feet long. So they grew throughout their lives, just like the crocodile today. This is a creature that clearly lived for much of its time in water. But it was also a creature that was able to move into the shallow areas of the water or even into the mud flat.
Finding these fossils was not easy. How long did it take you and how did you know where to start looking?
So it took us about 6 years to find the first one. Here's what we did. So we studied geology and we tried to say, okay, what are the right places in the world to look for a creature like this in the rocks? That we wanted rocks that were really old, about 375 million years old. So we knew that. We also knew we wanted rocks that were formed in ancient rivers and streams. So that's what we did. And we looked around the world using maps and scientific literature and papers and things like that. Until eventually we found the perfect place to look that had the right kinds of rocks of the right age is up in the Arctic, up in the Canadian Arctic, 600 miles from the North Pole.
This is an important fossil because it shows how parts of the anatomy of fish ultimately became parts of our human bodies. Tell us how our bodies evolved from fish, from these fish called lobe-finned fish.
You can trace many of the structures of our own bodies to those of fish in evolution. So when you look at our arm bones, our upper arm bone, forearm, parts of our wrist, all those bones originally arose in history in ancient fish. So we're descended from these fish over long periods of time. The same thing holds true for lungs. Fish also have lungs, believe it or not. Our jaw bones relate to gill bones in fish. We can trace the fossil record over time and see the origin of different parts of our body.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's amazing.
Well, I'll tell you what's amazing is we can now study DNA. We can compare the DNA of people to the DNA of fish, and guess what? There are some differences, but not a lot.
So what are you going to look for next?
Well, ideally, we'd like to go back to the Arctic at some point, to the field sites. When you're a scientist, the hunt for new fossils and new discoveries never stops, right? That's what's fun about it. Where did Tiktaalik come from? What's its closest fish relative? We've led expeditions to Antarctica. We're working on fossils we collected there about 2 years ago. And yeah, there's a whole world of questions out there. And when you're a scientist, that's what makes it so exciting.
Dr. Neil Shuben, thank you so much for joining us and for giving us this information about the fabulous fossils and research that you're doing, and keep up the great work.
Thank you. Good talking to you.
Wow, how exciting to see the work of these scientists and to realize how experts like Rich, Petra, and Neil are learning more and more about our world all the time, helping us to understand the squiggling, squirming, wonderful history of life and how we can better respect and protect all creatures and the homes that we share with them here on planet Earth. I hope that Out of the Blue inspires you to dive deeper and learn more about science. Let me know your questions and ideas. Bye for now.